What's up, Warriors, and welcome to another episode of the Mental Health Movement Podcast, Voice for the Voiceless. I'm your host, Chris. I just want to say thank you guys so much for tuning in to my last episode. I thought it was a really powerful one that I had with a grief counselor, and with all things that have recently gone on my life, it was something that I really needed, and I'm sure you guys listening also needed it as well. Today's guest, she is a psychologist, an adjunct instructor, performance coach, author, and she is the podcast host of The Optimized Mind. Please help me welcome Dr. Kate Lund. Hi, Kate. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you so much for having me, Chris. I appreciate it.
Thank you. I'm so happy that we finally got a date that we can both fulfill, and glad to have you on here today.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. So let's go ahead and dive into your story. You've spoken openly about growing up with, I'm gonna butcher this so hard. I'm gonna try not to. Growing up with hydrocephalus. Is that how you say it?
Hydrocephalus.
Okay.
Hydrocephalus. Yeah, yeah.
Um, how did that experience shape your understanding of resilience?
Yeah, it's a great question and an important question because it really, I think, formed the foundation for how I look at this idea of resilience, moving through and beyond challenge, that whole thing. Because, I was diagnosed with hydrocephalus when I was 4. And the hydrocephalus is essentially when the cerebral spinal fluid isn't circulating as it should, causing pressure to build up on the brain. And so that's what it is. And it's the good news is it's managed with something called a shunt, which is a surgically implanted little drain that circulates the fluid when it can't circulate on its own. So that's the good news. The bad news is shunts break, particularly in childhood, particularly, when they first, gone in. So I spent a large part of my childhood in and out of the hospital getting these shunt revisions, coming back to school looking different, feeling different, really kind of struggling to keep up a lot. And I think that foundation, those early experiences definitely set me up with an interest in kind of understanding people, understanding how people bounce back. I was really lucky because I had parents who really encouraged me to focus on what I could do as opposed to what I couldn't do. And that was backed up by teachers, by parents of friends, all of that. So that was a really fortunate piece. So I wasn't looking at myself as having a disability. I was looking at myself as being able to do most things, just not some. And so
Right.
that's really where it all started.
I love hearing that you had the support of both teachers, your parents, and some friends too, because that was actually going to be a follow-up question of mine of how was it going into school and just like how the support system was. I'm happy to hear that you did have people encourage you and just not judge you by a disability because I know that's something a lot of people struggle with, and I know there's a big stigma around people that have any disability of any kind. Um, were there ever moments in your childhood where you felt emotionally overwhelmed, and what helped you bounce back?
Well, I think being in a situation like I was, in the hospital a lot, out of the hospital, needing to get back on track and, kind of keep up with my academics, my schoolwork, all of that. I'm sure there were moments where I felt overwhelmed to a degree, but nothing really that stands out. I just sort of had this notion in my mind that I was just going to move forward as best I could. And I think ultimately it was because of that support system that I had in place. I was really, really very, very fortunate. I had obviously, particularly when things were going well and I wasn't, recovering from a recent hospitalization, I had expectations. I was expected to do my very best at all points. But I was also taught early to appreciate my own unique context and the fact that challenge is real and we all have challenges. It's how we move through and beyond them. And sometimes it's easier than other times. And I think those early messages um, really helped me to not get bogged down in the overwhelm of it all, despite the fact that, of course, there were overwhelming moments.
Right.
But they didn't derail me completely.
Right. And it's important to have that structure and just that belief system of, you're expected to, I guess, function like I don't want to use the word normal because I feel like the word normal is just such a strange way to phrase a statement. But just kind of like your everyday person, you're expected to kind of stay within those lines and remind yourself of, you're grateful that you're still here. You're grateful that you have these opportunities in front of you to overcome all those challenges. So, um, I'm a really big believer in structure, and I think it's so important in all walks of life to keep that structure.
100%. Yes. And, structure in a way that helps you to move towards your potential
Hmm.
and maximize that potential within your own context. And all of our potentials are going to look different. We're
Right.
coming from different backgrounds, different experiences, different aptitudes, passions, all of it, right? So it's going to look different. And it's being able to appreciate what you've got within your context and to kind of name and appreciate your own sense of potential, I think is very, very important.
Right. And whenever you decided to walk the path that you're currently on now, how supportive were your parents of pursuing your current career, just doing what you're doing?
Yeah, it was great. I mean, obviously, it was always part of the plan. I would go to college. I went to college and I studied psychology in college. And then I was very interested in journalism as well. So I took a little bit of time as part of my college experience studying at American University in Washington, D.C., doing a journalism program, which was pretty cool. And then went out to work in that field for a while before I went back to graduate school to become a psychologist. And so, yeah, no, my parents were very supportive of, me following my interests, my aptitudes, all of that. There was a point early on in school where I thought I wanted to be a pediatrician, but then kind of became clear that my aptitudes leaned more towards becoming a psychologist than
Hmm.
an actual medical doctor, with all that hardcore organic chemistry and such. Um,
Right.
so yeah, no, they were very supportive. I mean, it's probably not the direction they would have chosen to go, but that's what I think is so important for our kids, to allow them to explore their passions and
Yeah.
go where their aptitudes lead them, as opposed to putting them in a box based on what our experiences as parents have been.
Right. And, I feel like, because speaking from my point of view, I feel like there was always the putting people in a box and just, going off of like, this is where you should go because of your grades or whatever
Mm.
they are, and not encouraging people to follow their passions. I feel that was something I always struggled with in school because they didn't really attend to, what your passions were in life. It was just more so, oh, well, your grade point average isn't going to get you XYZ. And while, yes, the structure of the grading system is relevant, I know people that are street smart that are just as smart as people that are book smart. So it's
Yeah.
like, I don't know. I could just kind of wish the education system across the board would just attend to kids' passions more than what they're reading out of a book. You know what I mean? Especially with how technology is now.
Yes, yes, I totally agree with you. I mean, what that's kind of bringing to my mind is this notion of the SAT, for example.
Yes. Yes.
And oh man, I cannot stand the way kids are put into categories based on the scores that they get on that test. My SAT
Hmm.
was not good. So fortunately, when I was going through the process, people looked at the situation a little bit more holistically, which was wonderful. But yeah, it's hard, right? Because there's so much that kids and that we can offer beyond a score on a paper.
Right.
And I think that's such an important and relevant point to foster and talk about out there because
Yeah.
it's true, it's real.
One of my passions in middle school was in band. I was in band
Mm,
and I was playing an instrument. And in the middle of one of my classes, we had this test that doesn't exist anymore, but it was the FCAT test in Florida.
mm,
And from seventh grade to 11th grade, I failed the FCAT reading portion of the test, and I got put in an intensive reading. And
mm,
what that means is I didn't get any electives. I didn't get to take a
mm.
language. I didn't get to go to
Oh,
band. None of that.
oh, oh no.
It was miserable.
Oh,
Um, there was one year where I tried really hard to, the reading comprehension was always such a struggle for me because my eyes wander sometimes and I can't focus sometimes. And I failed it by 1 point,
Mm.
by 1 point. And they still
You.
stuck me in that class. I
Oh.
was so upset because it was my 11th grade year. And over the summer, they said you can take the SAT to get out of going to intensive reading for your senior year. I took the SAT and I blew it away. I was so
Nice.
upset. And
Yeah.
I was like, I wasted this amount of time in this intensive reading class when I could be fluent in a language right now. I could be in a band doing music right now or something. And
Yeah.
again, just kind of going back to the education thing,
Yeah.
there just seems to be no level of trying to ensure that kids are pursuing their passions or are secure in their future. You know,
Right.
sure,
Yeah.
there's those classes that will benefit us somewhere down the line, but X plus Y equals Z doesn't help me today. You know what I mean? Um,
110%. Yeah, absolutely. That's such an important point. And so listen, did you pick up music at another point?
so I did not, but I went the podcast route, and
Yep.
it
Okay.
seems to be
Okay.
working out right. I'm a really big on music. I constantly am listening to music or looking for new music and stuff. So that passion's still there, still very strong, and thankfully that never died out. I've been wanting to pick up an instrument, but I don't know. I guess that kind of fear at the back of my mind, like, oh, maybe I was taken out of band because I wasn't cut out for it, when I know that's not true.
Right. Right. Yeah.
But unfortunately, no, I didn't pick up music again, but music's still very, very prominent in my life, thankfully.
Nice. Nice. Awesome.
Um, how did your personal challenges influence your decision to become a psychologist? I know you kind of talked about that, but was it the chemistry part of the pediatrician route that kind of steered you towards a psychologist, or what was it specifically that enticed you to go after being a psychologist?
Well, I think that so there's a point in fifth grade where I missed a lot of school.
Hmm.
And I had been, just moving along on the math and science path and missed all that school. And then all of a sudden I was dropped down and I think I lost a bit of belief in myself. But I do also believe that my natural aptitudes lean more towards sort of the behavioral, social science side of things. But I did sort of move away from the math and science track. So I think that experience was pivotal. And then I just sort of naturally started gravitating towards, volunteering in hospitals and, early high school and doing little volunteer projects in middle school even, and just really honed in on my interest in understanding people and the people around me and relationships and that sort of thing. So I think it was that pivotal experience in fifth grade, but then it just evolved in a direction which made sense to my fundamental aptitudes. And then, I started studying it all in high school, and the rest is history.
I love that. I think psychology is such an interesting subject to learn. I remember my very first experience to psychology was senior year when I could take electives, actually.
Yes.
Um, and it's the one place that taught me what grief is. I didn't
Mm.
learn it from my parents. I didn't learn it from any exterior elements in my life. It was from psychology class, and
Mm.
it came in the form of this cartoon called Robot Chicken that's on Adult Swim, and they had a little bit there where it was a giraffe that fell into quicksand and
Oh,
goes through
wow.
the 5 stages of grief. And it taught
Mhm.
you every single level, it taught you acceptance, taught you anger, and that got me through my brother passing away. That was one of the things I leaned on, was like, oh, I'm feeling this stage. And obviously, when we go through grief, you're not going through each stage in order, right? And
Right.
I always lean back on that anytime I've had a loss in my life. It's like one thing I got out of high school, and it's that psychology class, and it was just so powerful to me.
Wow, that is powerful. That's very cool, and that it's been, sort of at the forefront of helping you to move through loss
Yeah.
and cope. And that structured understanding can be so helpful, so
Yeah,
powerful.
exactly. And I think that's been one of my foundations in life, just kind of remembering that lesson and remembering to be grateful for every day that I'm given and enjoy these conversations that I have with people like yourself. So, I take psychology, right to the heart. I love learning new things. I love learning new terms and hearing everybody's stories when it comes to why they're doing what they're doing. So, um, what does the word resilience mean to you today, and how has that definition evolved over time?
Yes, that's a really good question because, oftentimes people think of resilience as, oh, so a challenge pops up, I'm going to navigate the challenge and then push resilience over to the side. But I'm thinking of resilience much more broadly, more like a lifestyle, right? We want to develop a resilient lifestyle where we're really integrating the strategies and tools and things that we need in our life to be at our optimal, optimizing our own sense of well-being within our own unique context is really how I'm looking at resilience. And it's really at the core of this book that I just wrote for on resilient parenting called Step Away, and it's all about how are we optimizing our own sense of well-being. And the principles laid out in the book definitely apply to all of us across the lifespan. But that's really it's this broad concept that we want to be integrating, reinforcing all the time so that we
Yeah.
can show up at our best.
Yeah, I completely agree with that statement because I feel the word resilient is, I don't want to say thrown around, but just kind of maybe misinterpreted most of the time, where it's like, oh, well,
Mhm.
I had a hard day today, so I'm resilient. It's like,
Yeah.
you are, but you're not understanding completely. So,
Right.
if there's a word that I can resonate with more than any other, it's resilience. It's come from a broken home and very toxic parents, unfortunately. So it's just been constant battle after battle. And I think what therapy has done for me is given me a lot of resilience and being able to uh, establish boundaries, which is something I never understood what were until I started therapy. So, again, going back to the psychology thing, when you learn new terms and the understanding of them, resilience being one of them, I think you couldn't have put it any better way. It is such a broad statement, and thank you so much for sharing that.
Sure, absolutely.
So you work with students, athletes, professionals on peak performance. What are some common mental blocks do you feel that they face?
Yeah, so one of the things is that I see a lot. I mean, I see a lot of different things, but is that they're not able to manage their emotion and tolerate the frustration of not hitting the mark or, not hitting their high expectations. High expectations is sort of another issue, but really important for us to have a system, have a way, a tool really to manage our stress response day to day so that we can show up as level as possible without starting up here. And then when a challenge or a stressor hits, in the classroom or on the field, boom, we escalate to the point of shutdown.
Right.
So I teach a technique called the relaxation response that was designed by a physician in Boston in the 1970s named Herbert Benson. Super simple technique, but very powerful. And so I have folks come up with a word or a phrase that they find soothing in some way, and they just breathe. 5 minutes in the morning, 5 minutes in the late day. Kind of like bookending the day and starting to integrate what it feels like to be in that level space.
Mhm.
And then folks can carry that around in their back pocket. Like they're going into a stressful test, or something happens on the baseball field, or someone's trying to hit a PR in the gym, or, any number of things can happen. Really important for folks to be working daily on modulating their stress response and keeping it as level as possible. And then, of course, there's the managing expectations, and there's the, perfectionism thing, and, not comparing ourselves to others, and all of that.
The comparison part, I'm sure, is such a challenge to work with people. I know that's something that I myself have inherited from my mom, unfortunately. Because
Mm.
when you grow up hearing, "Oh, I wish they had a big house," or "It must be nice for them to have a big house," stuff like that,
Mm.
just kind of got integrated in my mind. And I know sometimes because I spent a good portion of my life just surviving and not
Mm.
healing from what I went through. Comparison, it's a thief, it's a thief of joy.
Yeah.
It's a very common phrase, and I don't think a lot of people really fully take in that statement of how heavy comparison can be when it comes to our mental health.
100%. Yes. And you're exactly right. The thief of joy and can really bog us down and block us from, reaching our own potential within our own
Hmm.
unique context. And part of the, way that we break free from this comparison thing is we really work hard to focus on what our context is. Doesn't mean that we can't, try to get better and get stronger or, whatever, build in various ways. But at a fundamental level, understanding and appreciating who we are within our own unique context without looking outside and being like, oh, I wish I had that bigger house, or I wish I had more money, or I wish I was smarter, or stronger, or taller, or whatever. All of those things are not useful
Hmm.
for us to optimize our own sense of well-being, maximize our own potential. It takes away from those things.
Yeah, and if I can share just like a personal uh I guess, story with you. One of the biggest things that I struggled with was, debating on whether or not I wanted to go back to school.
Mm,
I was talking with my therapist about it, and, just the money part aside, I just told her, I'm like, I didn't really have a lot of encouragement when I was in high school. So, I mean, I was
mm,
fairly average and didn't really get help in classes and everything. And I really struggled in school a lot. And I said, I just have that fear of failure and just comparing myself to the people that have gone to school for a long time. And uh, I remember one person that I interviewed
mm,
a couple years ago. She had three doctorates,
mm.
and
Wow.
I told her whenever I think it just came out as an impulse when I said it. I said, I'm not gonna lie, before this interview, I was very intimidated. And I
Mm,
said, not because uh, I think that I'm any less of a person than you are, but just kind of like you're a very well-educated person, and
mm,
I feel stupid. And I know I'm
mm.
not stupid. I have a different kind of intelligence.
Right.
But when you're comparing yourself to people's accomplishments, and I had this conversation with my best friend a couple of days ago, um, and he's like, you started at a very different time in your life of when you were taking care of yourself, when you were able to get help for yourself. He's like, you're not behind, you're just, you are where you need to be. And I think that's what a
Mm.
lot of people need to understand when it comes to the comparison thing is you're exactly where you need to be.
Yes, I
And
think that's such a strong point. That's such an
yeah,
important point.
and that comes with accountability
Mm,
too, though, because while we're healing, you can choose to sit in that pain, but you got to also realize that anything that's holding you back, sometimes it could be you're holding yourself back. But
mhm.
that
Yeah.
accountability needs to be a really big thing. And I feel in this community, just in general, accountability is something a lot of us struggle with.
100%. Yes. Uh-huh. To be accountable. That personal responsibility piece is really important and not to, yeah, externalize like, well, that didn't happen because you know what I mean? Sometimes, sure, there are external factors that impact, but really making sure that we're doing what we can within our own unique context to be at our best, I think is
Yeah.
very important.
Absolutely. Let's talk about your podcast a little bit. So it is titled The Optimized Mind, and you had mentioned that you did a little bit of journalism in college as well. How much of that journalism did that play into your podcast that you do now? Did it help you ease into the podcast world, or tell us a little bit about your podcast?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So one quick thing, disclaimer on the podcast. So the Optimized Mind, I wrapped it up at the end of November. I think we've been talking about this date for a really long time. So anyway, but wonderful project and loved it. Did it for 3 years, interviewed 160 guests, and
Wow.
definitely my journalism thing played into that. I did the journalism thing in college, as I mentioned, but I also worked in the summers at a local radio station where I grew up in
Oh,
Connecticut.
wow.
And it was awesome. Like I interviewed all sorts of people and I loved it, right? And so I actually just recently started another podcast as a companion to the book I just wrote called Resilient Parenting with Dr. Kate. But bouncing back to the optimized mind, fabulous, fabulous experience. It was sort of looking at this idea of resilience across domains and just all sorts of different people I interviewed, authors, parents, corporate folks, entrepreneurs, athletes, all with a little bit of a different angle on, resilience in their own lives. And that was the idea, to really get at the human experience of resilience and how that can play out so differently for all of us, but play out so clearly and in such a real way to help us optimize our own sense of well-being within our own unique context. So that's really what that was all about. And fabulous. And it's still out there. Obviously, it'll be out there forever. So
I
it'll
love
never
that.
go away.
So, what's the title of your new podcast again?
Resilient Parenting with Dr. Kate.
I love that. And when did you start that?
It will launch on March 5th.
Oh,
So
okay.
I am building, so I'm pushing myself to do some solo episodes in that. So
Cool.
it'll be 2 interviews and 2 solo episodes a month.
Very nice. I love that. I think the most wonderful part of doing the podcasting is, like you said, meeting all the different walks of life that we meet, right? And
Mhm.
hearing every different kind of story you could possibly hear. And, I think it's important to note doing what we do, um, when you meet people and hear some of their stories are so tragic, some of them break your heart. And then you hear the upside of why they're sharing their story and how
Mhm.
much better they're doing in life is trauma is not a competition. And I really want to
Mhm.
make that a point because I know again the comparison thing is really something that can hurt in the long run. A sprained ankle and a broken leg are two different injuries, but both of them hurt, right?
Mhm.
And I feel that is one of the things that stopped me from going to therapy for the longest time because not only did I feel that what I went through wasn't that bad, and while it was pretty traumatic, especially talking about what I went through to my therapist, it's not as I guess not as bad as
Mhm.
everybody else what they have gone through, right? And then when you start unraveling your
Mhm.
journey and you realize like, wow, I went through that. Wow, I had to endure that. And it's like, yeah, it was pretty bad. And I'm glad I'm starting to talk about it now, right? But my
Yeah.
point of what my rambling, I apologize, um,
Right.
is just I love learning about people. I love learning
Mhm.
about everybody's journey,
Yeah.
and I think it's so special when you get to see the smile in people's faces and understand the resilience, our favorite word of today's
Mhm.
podcast, that people can push themselves through when pushed, hard enough to get better for themselves. So, yeah, just my little soapbox take of that, and I think what you're doing is great, and I love that you have another podcast. So, congrats on the new podcast. Sure, it'll bring in quite the audience. Um, how do you balance psychology with coaching, and when do you switch hats?
Yeah, it's folks generally will come for one or the other.
Hmm.
Of course, there are those instances where someone comes for coaching and maybe they would benefit more from therapy, maybe vice versa. So it's really kind of a collaborative process with the client or the patient or whoever it is that I'm working with. Um, and if I feel like maybe therapy is more appropriate and we're in a coaching situation, I'll bring it up and we'll talk
Yeah,
through it and we'll see what makes most sense. But yeah, that's basically how that looks.
yeah. So I guess kind of a follow-up to that, because I'm a really big advocate in therapy, obviously. What would you say to the people who aren't too sure about therapy or just kind of like, I don't know if therapy is for me, but I know I need help of some sort. Because, obviously therapy is not for everybody, right?
Sure. Of
But it is
course.
very beneficial.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's not for everybody, for sure. And, the other thing is, different therapists, and kind of talking to different people, kind of interviewing therapists to see if the disposition is a fit, to see if, the comfort level. And sometimes it just takes a little bit to get started. So what I would encourage is, if you think that it's possible that therapy could be beneficial to you, but you're feeling a bit overwhelmed, give it a try. Doesn't have to be forever. You're not locked in per se, but give yourself that opportunity to explore it. And perhaps you'll be surprised at the power in it and the benefits, because as you mentioned, it's quite powerful.
Yeah. I remember I had one really bad experience with a therapist. Right before I had the therapist I do now,
Mm,
I almost gave up. I almost didn't try to get help for myself again. And I remember Nami coming to my job, and I sat in on that class and I waited till everybody left because I don't feel comfortable talking about my personal life
mhm,
uh, in a public setting.
mhm,
And I asked him, I said, "Hey man, like I had a really bad experience with a therapist and I know I need another therapist, like not like in a crisis zone, but I don't want to get there either." And I
mm,
said, would be the best advice for somebody who's looking for a therapist but is terrified to look for another one?" And he
mm,
said, almost similar to what you said, ask questions. He's like,
mm,
it's
yeah,
okay to go through several therapists. And the main thing is ask each therapist if it's just one or if it's just two that you go through, ask them what they cover, ask them what they can do for you and if it's beneficial. And maybe coaching is something for you, like you mentioned.
mhm,
And just know that therapy is not the end all be all and you have to go there. And I feel like for me, growing up in a household of parents that didn't take care of themselves, there was
mm,
that stigma of you only go to therapy if you're crazy and
right,
you only take medicine if you're dying. It's like, well, that's not, neither one of those statements are true.
right.
And
100%.
breaking through that stigma for me, I think was one of the hardest things I had to do because I didn't think I was worthy of being in therapy. I didn't think my journey was worth talking about. And when I first went to therapy in New Jersey, spent 2 sessions, hour-long sessions, crying,
Mm,
not
mm,
talking, just crying.
mm.
And after that second session, we had a great productive conversation for 6 months. Then I came back down here to Florida, and now I'm 5 years into a therapist who is absolutely wonderful. So things can change with the right questions being asked.
100%, exactly. And it's finding that fit, finding that connection that allows that comfort level to rise. Yeah, absolutely. That's quite powerful. That's cool.
Because at the end of the day, we all want to be heard, right? We all want to be seen and we all want to be safe above everything else. And I feel that is the most important part of starting therapy is making sure that you feel safe and where you're at. So
100%. Yes.
how does your first couple sessions with a client work for you? Like, are you just building that rapport and just kind of reaffirming that you're there to listen and no judgment?
Yes. Yeah. All of that. Really, trying to connect on a human level through building that initial rapport, understanding what the client's experience is, what's bringing them in, how we can best help, but really getting a sense of what's important to them. Who are they as a person, beneath the surface of the challenges that are bringing them in, that kind of thing. But it's
Right.
that rapport that's so vital, that foundational rapport, and that can take a little bit, take a couple sessions, and then that collaborative co-construction from there, really following the lead of what somebody needs.
Yeah. What specific topics do you cover in your sessions, like disorder wise? Like I know some therapists only talk about like depression, anxiety. Like, is your background with all kinds of disorders?
Yeah, I generally work mostly anxiety, depression, folks who are trying to sort of reinvent in some way, career-wise, or, bogged down by stress, overwhelm, burnout, that sort of thing. And I also have an expertise in medical psychology. So, folks who maybe have a new diagnosis or who are trying to manage a chronic illness in some way or chronic medical condition. And then I also work a lot with parents who are overwhelmed and maybe on the cusp of burnout from helping their child through a serious medical situation.
Right. I
So
love
it's
that.
it's a range, but it's those are the general areas.
And I feel like it's so important to reinforce the things that you do cover because I know sometimes I have seen it in sub descriptions. I don't see it very often, but when it's only just like a couple things, like oh yeah, I covered depression. Do you cover anything else? Like you know what I mean? Like I just feel it's so important to just remind people what you cover. So I love that you have such a wide variety of topics that you cover. I think that's super important. Um,
100%. Yeah.
so you also have a another book, I believe it's called Bounce, right? Bounce,
Yes.
it's a guide for parents. What inspired you to write that one?
Yeah, so that is a guide for parents, exactly. Bounce, help your child build resilience and thrive in school, sports, and life. And to be honest, I was really inspired to write that because my kids were in elementary school at the time, and I was, and I was working with a lot of families, a lot of parents with kids around the same age. It's kind of like noticing the challenges that were coming up for so many
Hmm.
kids, and it was kind of like, how do these kids navigate through and beyond, right? What are the pillars of the resilient child? And so came up with these 7 pillars and focused the book around that. Cool thing is, though, the pillars apply to all of us across the lifespan. It's managing frustration, tolerating emotion, navigating friendship and social pressure, focus and attention, courage, motivation, confidence, and optimism. And so, kind of talk in the book through case examples about why each of these things is important, and really has been, it's, still active and out there. It's been a great project.
I love that. When did you write that one?
So that was 2017.
Okay, okay.
And
Um,
so Step Away, The Keys to Resilient Parenting just came out this past October.
I love it. Congrats on the book release.
Thanks.
Um, how did you navigate the pandemic? I think that's a question that I actually had written down. I wasn't sure how I wanted to ask it, but how did you navigate the pandemic when it comes to, your clientele and just how you dealt with those sessions?
Yeah, so it's interesting because right prior to the pandemic, I just happened to shift my practice online. So I was virtual already when the pandemic started. So, and I was also working so I had my own private clients, but I was also working for a company called Doctor on Demand, which is not exactly what it sounds like. It wasn't like, call me up on demand and it's a crisis. These were like long-term clients that I had through them, but it really, ratcheted up during the pandemic because people had more time for that. So I was seeing a lot of clients. I
Yeah,
was fortunate in that our boys were in 7th grade at the time, and they were able to pretty much self-manage when I was working. And so we were all here working. My husband was here working, I was working, the boys were doing school. And so we were pretty fortunate during the pandemic. We didn't feel isolated, or there wasn't a huge loss for me in terms of my
mhm.
business, because if anything, my business took off because people were home and they were stressed and they
Yeah.
needed support. So pandemic was an okay time for us.
I love that you switched like just before that happened. I know that was such a hard adjustment for so many people, so it's great to hear that you were staying afloat during that time because I know it was pretty hard.
Yeah, I know it was really, really hard for a lot of people, and I was glad to be able to help in any way that I could. But from the perspective of here, it was okay.
Good. I'm glad to hear that. In your TED Talk, you had shared your personal journey. What was it like to speak so vulnerable on the stage?
Yeah, that was so the TED Talk was awesome. It was a great experience, right? But it was, so yes, so whenever I go onto a stage, there's
Hmm.
that moment of really like panic before you get on the stage. But the TED Talk was so heavily integrated. I
Yeah.
mean, I think my kids can still probably tell you what I said in that talk because I was practicing it every night as I was making dinner, like out loud, like, trying to. So it was almost like muscle memory when I got up there on the stage. But, the vulnerability, the story, it was sort of at the beginning of when I started to talk openly about that experience.
Right.
So that was a little bit, that added a level of hard to it, I would say,
Yeah.
the experience. But ultimately, it was definitely a positive experience.
Yeah.
And I remember panicking before I first went up on stage, but then I think it was so integrated in my mind that I was just like, boom, and then I got off the stage and can't quite tell you what happened in the middle, but yeah,
Did you happen to use that technique that you show your clients, the breathing technique, like just before you got on stage?
definitely,
I love
definitely,
it.
definitely, yes, absolutely.
What would be your best advice to people that want to share their journey but aren't exactly comfortable to share their journey yet?
Yes, that's a really, really great question. And I think that practicing um practicing sharing with small groups or maybe one trusted person to start and
Mhm.
then see, I have a friend here in town who is actually a librarian at the school where I used to teach, and she has some good friends. They're a little bit older than I am, and they were really wonderful. They kind of created this like practice group for me, and they'd come over to the house and I would practice. And I had never shared that story basically beyond like my inner circle. And so that was really hard sharing it with those guys at first because I was like, this feels weird, I haven't done, that kind of thing. But it was really great practice, and I think paved the way, set the foundation for a level of comfort in
Yeah.
talking about it. And I think that was very powerful. And it definitely helped me prepare for the TED Talk,
Yeah.
because that I was practicing the talk. So I would say start small,
Hmm.
see how it feels,
Yeah.
and go from there. Because sometimes we have to desensitize to the feelings of vulnerability or awkwardness or hard or whatever.
Yeah.
So that's what I would say.
I feel like for me, when I first shared my journey, it was on social media and it was in a suicide prevention group. And when I shared it, it got a lot of attention, a lot of really positive feedback, and
Mhm.
I think just to piggyback off of your advice, I feel, yeah, it is super important to have that support group, right? Start with people you trust. Um, I also would want to make a point to say, be careful with who you give certain information to
100%. Yes.
because there could be people that would use your story as a weapon against you.
Hmm.
Not to like kind of be like a fear monger or anything, just kind of speak from an experience of somebody has used my story against me.
Hmm.
And unfortunately, that is the reality you face when you do decide to step into that spotlight of people might be out to get you. But all in all, your story can help you take that deep breath. You need to, be able to breathe. That story of yours isn't constricting you anymore. And for me, my story is two attempts. One very young, 14 years old was my very first attempt, and 27 was my second attempt. And my brother saved my life and prevented that second attempt, and forever grateful for him, even though he's no longer here. Um, it's so important to help others find their voice and provide that safe space for others around us. And for those of us like you and myself, who are that listening ear to so many, the advice I would give for the listeners would be if somebody wants to share their story with you, listen without judgment. Don't listen to respond. Don't offer unsolicited advice and listen to understand. And I think that's one of the hardest things just as humans that we do is we have that impulse of replying. We want to give advice even if it's advice that somebody didn't ask for. So just try to listen with your heart, try to listen and understand what people are going through before offering any kind of response.
100%. Could not agree more. That's so, so important because that's at the core of that human connection, right? And
Yeah.
it's true, the impulse to like, but better to just really listen and take that in. So
Yeah.
important.
So I kind of ask a version of this question to all my guests, but just kind of try to reword it. If somebody listening is feeling emotionally exhausted or stuck, what would be your best advice to them right now?
Yeah, so what I would say, what I would suggest is really try to focus on the possibility. on the other side of what you're feeling, on the other side of that challenge, and really give yourself time to kind of try to uncover that because
Yeah,
there is possibility out there, but don't uh don't push yourself to do it too fast.
absolutely agreed. And there is one more question that I ask all my guests, and I'm very curious to hear your answer on this one. If you could change one thing in the mental health community, what would it be?
So I would say accessibility.
Yes,
Just making things a bit more accessible, a bit more readily available for anybody who needs it, in a way as a way of destigmatizing it.
couldn't agree more. And I think it should be, maybe encouraged a little bit more in schools too. Obviously you can only
Mhm.
say so much for legal reasons because they are minors, but I also feel that mental health resources are just kind of like a reminder, like, hey, you're having a rough day, we have a counselor. You know,
Mhm.
um, One thing I'm grateful for is I had a counselor in sixth grade when my parents were first getting divorced and just kind of things were rough at home. I had that counselor in sixth grade, and they kind of pushed me to where I'm at now. Obviously, it took a very long time for me to finally seek therapy, but those counselors do help. They just like therapists help, just like coaches help, and everything in between. I couldn't agree more on the accessibility. I think it should be readily available for everybody across the board.
100%. Absolutely.
So at the end of every podcast, I like to come up with a quote that I found off of any social media or just some inspiring words. But before we get to those, where can our listeners find you?
So, best place is my website, which is www.katelundspeaks.com. And I'm also on LinkedIn and Instagram. So, any of those places is great.
Perfect. Before I read my quote, did you have any closing words you want to share with the listeners?
Well, I think I would just repeat kind of what I said before about possibility and really
Yeah.
trying to focus on the possibilities that are out there for you on the other side of the challenge, for both yourself and your kids.
Yeah. Really big believer in positive affirmations. I
Mhm.
believe it was Henry Ford that said, whether you believe you can or can't do something, you're right. And, when we feed ourselves negative, self-destructive talk, your brain believes that because you say it enough times. But on the
Mhm.
flip side, if you keep telling yourself you're enough, you keep telling yourself that you're going to have a good day, your brain starts rewiring itself. And, things do get better once you not only put the work in, but, manifest that good, positive self-talk. Um,
100%.
so my quote, for some reason, the screenshot shaved off the author on here, so I'll be sure to find that after this recording. But it reads, "You are not a burden. You are not a waste of space. There's only one of you, and nobody can ever take your place."
That's awesome.
Think with recent events, I think it's something that I really wanted to read for the simple fact of suicide awareness being something I'm very big on, and having those important conversations with people like yourself. So, Kate, again, thank you so very much for coming on today's podcast. Um,
And
it's
thank
been
you for
very,
having me. Thank you
yeah,
so much.
it's been very insightful, and I love that. You kind of peeled the curtain back a little bit for us and what your day to day looks like and everything you offer to this community. So thank you again so much for everything you do.
Well, thank you for having me. This has been great. Thank
Of
you.
course. For all my listeners, thank you guys as always for tuning in. Until next time, much love and be gentle with yourselves. Take care.